with an example of what I was looking for. I gave you those examples that were on the test themselves, where I showed you one that was and one that wasn't conclusive. What Jamie just said was she found a study. Do you remember what was it, Gallup, Quinnipiac, Rasmussen? It was Gallup poll. And they listed their sample size at the bottom. Now this is way deeper than I expected you to go, so thank you for that, first of all. And she checked the sample size and she said, based on that sample size and 95% confidence, was the margin of error they reported correct? So she ran the sample size, basically through the sample size program, but backwards, if you will, or ran the confidence through the sample size program, and discovered that the sample they drew was actually 500-ish shy of what it should have been. So she looked at the difference in the study, and she said the margins of error didn't overlap. But they would have overlapped if they used the correct margin of error, which would have been wider because of the small sample. Holy hell, that's awesome! Way deeper than I expected you to go.
Okay, well I thought I would get it wrong because there was no overlapping, so I changed it to, okay, there was no overlapping, so it was fine.
You guys are still fighting that old math feeling, and it's understandable. It's understandable. You're still fighting that old math feeling of, I want there to be one right answer, and I feel awful if I can't find that one right answer. What you just described to me is over and above what I was expecting on that. I mean, honestly. I mean, the fact that you went to a sample size and said it's not big enough, that's big. I was looking for something as simple as what I put in those two examples, where here they overlap, here they don't. The stuff I've been talking about all along, the idea of overlapping versus non-overlapping confidence intervals. That's pretty much the one thing I was looking for. You said, yeah, they don't overlap, but they should because you did it wrong. That's the kind of stuff you send off in an email to them, and they ignore, usually. But every once in a while, they'll fix things based on that, which is fantastic. Way past. I'm looking forward to see whatever you did put.
I just said that it was.
It's all good.
So
it's significant. Then you got the point. Remember what I said earlier, I don't expect you guys to remember every single little piece of the course. I expect you to remember the underlying current, and that is the underlying current of confidence intervals. If intervals don't overlap, there is something significantly different about them. And if they do, there's not. That's the big takeaway. If you guided that through the entire exam, how many times did you see that on that exam? Constantly. Constantly. The very first question, the diabetes and the Lipitor, I think it was Lipitor and diabetes rates, or whatever it was, were they overlapping in the first problem? I believe they weren't. I believe they were separate. So then, I believe, I'm going by memory, because then I had to analyze it even further to talk about how much more likely you were to get, was it diabetes, type 2 diabetes, I think?
Yeah.
With Lipitor, that's where you form that ratio, that relative risk ratio. Yeah. So you got the underlying thing. I think you guys are still, and this is because you're victims of the American school system. You want X to equal 2, and you will not accept anything else. Trust me, in life, X does not equal 2. As you've realized, no matter how hard you try, your bills every month fluctuate a little bit. They fluctuate a little bit. But they stay around an average, and they stay around a plus or minus of that average every month-ish. And if something doesn't, then you analyze why. Well, hell, that's what we're doing right now. Fluctuation around an average, and all of a sudden, boom, outlier. Analyze the outlier. Find out what's going on.
I'm sensing a question for the other test.
Say that again.
I'm sensing a question for the other test.
Oh, actually, it's a 243 question. My our data bill came back in December. It was like off the charts. Like, if you have Ben Broadband, I guess you can pay for these data plans. My wife does all the bills, thank God, because I can't handle those numbers. It doesn't look like math to me anymore. It looks like some kind of bastardization of math. Like doing my taxes, like I don't know who the hell created that code, but that's not mathematics. And there was a spike in our data usage over December, and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm doing nothing. I listen to my freaking iPod when I go to work, which is songs I've downloaded for years. And I'm like, do you ever think that Max has been home a lot over the break? He watches a lot of like Teen Movie Zoomy, things like that over the break. Oh, never thought about that. Like, let's go back and look at the past records of data. And I plotted them. And you know what they do? They did this. You know, a little spike, a little bit noisy. Actually, I can show them to you. See them? What's that?
My niece is watching this.
It's Teen Movie Zoomy. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
But everyone had titles now.
So here, should be popping up here. Brandon, would you mind? Thanks, dude. There's the bill that was hit from December. So you see, there's a bit of a trend and then a little bit of a spike. A little bit of a spike. But the thing is that spike kicked us into the next billing level at Ben Broadband. So the question then I have to ask, and this is what I asked her, she's like, well, should we start paying for the next data level up? Well, I said, well, there's two things we have to consider. Number one, how unusual is that spike?
I don't think that's the spike you're talking about.
So that again?
That's March.
But it's the bill is 2 months usually delayed from the data usage, or a month delayed.
Wow.
So the question is, oh, sorry, you're right, Kate, I'm sorry.
I was like,
It's over here,
I feel
it's over here, there it is.
Whoa.
See, that's
yeah,
more
okay.
Sorry, you're right, I'm looking at March 13, not March 14 or December 14. So the question is that unusual based on current usage or previous usage? Or is it an expected high value? So it's the difference, and I was correcting 243 yesterday where they kept calling the biggest data point in the data set an outlier. It might not be an outlier, it might just be the biggest data point, not unusually big. So the question is that spike and the ones around it, are they unusually big? And the answer to that is tricky because what you have to do with this is something called a control chart. And we also lost some data in here for some reason. I'm not sure why we didn't have those 3 months worth of data. I'm not really sure. But you have this kind of, you can almost see it, this like cyclical wave of data. And then you've got this hiccup. Well, is that hiccup to be expected every once in a while? Or is that completely an anomaly for the data set? If it's completely an anomaly for the data set, then I say stay in the data plan we're already using.
But it depends on how much overage they charge you for not being in the
Well, but you have to have a probability first. First of all, how likely is that to happen?
once a year.
Once every 2 years according to our past records.
He's older now.
Sure, but the question is, that's why I'm looking at it a time series. We've never had time series stuff before, except in 243 with my chickens and their eggs. That was the only time you ever looked at time series stuff. Time, it puts an interesting element into it. Because you have to also look, he's home for Christmas break then.
But if they only charge you $10 more every month versus
That's the if.
$300 one
But you
month.
have to see the likelihood of the event, not just the cost. It goes back to 243 when you calculate the average of a probability distribution. Remember when I had you guys play actuary in class, when you took my death rate, my dismemberment rate I think it was, and my not death nor dismemberment rate, and you had a quiz in class, and you also did it in some homework questions too, and you had to figure out how much they should charge me on a premium to make a certain amount of money. Remember that? It's that question. You have to know not only how much they charge, but how likely is it that you're going to get charged that. If that truly is an outlier, then let it go. It's only going to happen once every 2 years. We absorb the cost, it gets spread over 2 years, all is well. Why pay more every month for something that's only going to happen once every 24 cycles? That doesn't make any sense. Then you're actually paying more money overall. It's like paying when you have health insurance. There are two kinds of health plans that are very popular right now. One is called a high deductible health plan, and one's more classically called a Cadillac plan, where you get the best health plan there is available for your institution, which means you pay the highest premium every month. You're paying the highest premium every month. But when you go to the doctor, you pay a very low deductible. So you have like a $25 copay versus a $75 copay. Well, that plan doesn't make any sense for my family. Because I go to the doctor, thank goodness, once a year for my annual. My son goes for his inoculations, which is I think once a year, once every 6 months, or for his physical, which is once a year. And Jen goes once or twice a year as well. It doesn't make sense for us to pay more every month for the off chance that we have to go to the doctor for something big. It makes more sense to save all that money that we're not paying in premiums into an interest-bearing account for the times that we do need it. And it works brilliant. No, it's mathematics and it's probability. And it's worked out for 5 years. We've had to tap into that one time, I forget what it was, about 2 years ago. We had to go, was it my allergies or something? I'm not saying it's going to work forever, I'm saying it works right now. I mean, that's why it's time series. You're analyzing it based on time. But you can't ignore the likelihoods. You have to look at the likelihoods as well as the payoffs. If they charge me $8,000 for an overage, then I'm going to switch to the next plan up because I can't afford $8,000. As it turns out, I think it pops to like 50 bucks more or so. This time was like 50 bucks over the normal cost, which is like 60 bucks a month. So we absorbed that cost, we spread 50 bucks over 2 years worth, it's less than 2 bucks a month, and everybody's happy. So, but you have to look at the likelihood of it. And that's my point, is that there's the data. What does it tell you? Now, it tells me that there's a control area in here above which these points lie. These two actually didn't kick us out, that one did. So knowing that truly is an unusual event, we can go back, look at that unusual event, see how it was different, and see how likely it is that we pop into it again. But you can't ignore that likelihood. That's what the p-value is. That's what the p-value is. Is it likely that that data point right there represents a true change in behavior? Excuse me. Or is it just the random high end of the tail that we sometimes get in bell curves? We do. We sometimes get high ends of bell curves. I mean, they exist, right? There's 2 standard deviations is 95%, and then you've got this 2.5 on either side. What is that most likely? And that's a lot of times what we can't do in this class is we can't go deeper. Like we can identify a small p-value, which we'll do more of today. We can identify a small p-value and say, okay, one of 2 things just happened. Either we got a random little fluctuation in the system, or something changed and the system no longer holds. This is what you're talking about, Dina, when you talk about you're getting older and things are going to change. You're absolutely correct. You have to look at those things, just like your investment portfolio. As you get older, you have to change the allocations of that. But you have to look at it. You have to say, okay, how much more likely is it? So one of the data points I just did a health assessment. Apparently I'm as healthy as the super average 30-year-old. I don't know what that means. I don't know what an average 30-year-old is. But, so that's one piece of data I put in there. Adjust that for my health insurance. This turns out can be very, very easily explained. So it was an anomaly. It wasn't normal behavior of a new system. It was just an anomaly in the old system. So that's, you have to look at likelihoods. You can't ignore them and just focus on cost. Because that's the problem. When the first high deductible health plan came out for COCC, nobody wanted to use it. Because they only looked at the fact that the maximum out of pocket every year was $10,000. Whereas the normal plan was $2,500. They said, well, I can't afford $10,000. I said, what makes you think you're going to spend $10,000? And what they said? It says right there, maximum out of pocket $10,000. Do you think to ask yourself how likely it is you're going to accrue that much in medical bills this year? You know what I was told?
But how likely is it you're going to get more than 2,500? That's a different.
So why pay the high premium? Why not pay the low? If you're not going to get $2,500, then use the high deductible one.
You probably will.
That's defined probably.
One trip to the other.
How likely is that?
Depends on who you are.
Depends on who you are. You can't, that's the question. It depends on who you are. But when I hear my entire colleague unit saying it's pretty likely, no, it's not pretty likely based on the past 10 years of results that I've seen. If you pull St. Charles medical records, it's not likely that that's going to happen to you. It's likely to happen to a few people, and for those people, yes, please take the plan with the highest premium because it makes the most sense. But for the younger and people that are taking better care of themselves, perhaps.
But there's so many people that run in bicycles.
Yes, it hasn't happened to me since I moved. So statistically, I'm also very smart the way I ride. I mean, you can't loop all bicyclists together. I've seen guys riding down the street with black hoodies, no helmet, no lights, wrong side of the road. That guy is in the same statistical pool that I'm at. But he is not in the same statistical pool that I'm at. Don't ignore the probabilities. They're huge. They're huge. Yeah, Harrison.
Okay, so Professor, so Max is what? Or sorry, Max is like
Sean.
2 or 3.
He's 6. Thank you.
He's
Yeah.
6 now.
That's all.
Okay, so do you ever consider that he might just be at like a different age bracket now, where he's starting to figure out how to download stuff?
Yes, but
And so it's a
that's why I'm going to watch that.
Okay.
Now, you can't say it's going to be a trend. We're going to say wait and see
Yeah, you gotta
if
wait
it's
and
a
see.
trend. Careful! You can't make a trend on 2 data points. You have to watch and see. You have to watch and see. You can't make a decision based on 2 because your margin's too wide.
Exactly.
Because I can't say that anomaly up there happened because Max is now 6. Why all of a sudden now that he's 6 and 4 months it's different than when he's 6 and 2 months?
I don't know.
There's an easier
Can't
explanation.
say you gotta go
There's an
full
easier
far.
explanation. It was cold as hell over this Christmas break, and he spent a lot of time inside. We would build Legos for 3 hours, and then I'd get burnt out, need like an hour to myself, and he'd go pull up Timu Mizumi. Not on Netflix that we'd already downloaded, but a live data feed.
Okay.
That's an easy explanation. Now, I'm not saying that your point is invalid. I'm saying I haven't seen that
You
yet.
can't prove it.
I can't prove anything anyway, but I haven't seen that particular trend yet.
Correlation, not causation.
Exactly. But there's a high correlation between that spike and what he was doing over that month when it was cold. Yeah.
So the answer to your problem is switch to Quest, it has unlimited data.
That's the answer. Jen is like, she's like a stock trader with our utilities. I mean, we've got Dish on the back that is now just hanging there collecting snow because she decided it was cheaper to go with whatever she uses. I don't watch television at all, so I have no idea what's going on. She somehow juggles the cards and manages. That's why this jumped out, was because it was an unusual overage. She's usually a really good day trader as far as this stuff goes. I don't understand. Like I said, that's not mathematics to me anymore. That just becomes the hoodoo witchcraft.
We don't do cable, we just download.
What? All good. I have VHS in my office. I watch videos when I get changed when I commute home 3 minutes at a time. So, but anyway, this is interesting because this ties into what we're talking about. How do we explain that if it even is worth explaining? And Dee Dee, you got a point. Watch the rest and see what happens. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep plotting this because now I'm interested. Now I'm interested to see if this is a new trend. Will it stay up here or will it revert back down to this? Right now, that looks unusual. But if the next few are hovering up here, then it's a quantum shift in something, whether it is. What's great is Jen went in and started looking at everything. She's like, you have a Dropbox, right? Yeah. And my band and I will send songs back and forth. If we're working on new material, we'll drop WAV files or MP3s in a Dropbox, send the links to each other. Well, when I upload that data to Dropbox, that's data, which means it's data usage. If I'm putting an MP3 up, that's like 3 or 4 megs. This was over by 50 gigs. And I would have to upload Led Zeppelin's entire catalog 6 times in a high-quality waveform to move that much data. So when you start looking at that, you're like, okay, that's not doing it. So what is doing it? Oh, a series of pictures and audio, otherwise known as T-Mumi-Zumi. That's what's doing it. That's what did it. Actually, that's what did it here. That's what spiked it there. And when you trend that backwards, you see that my data usage is identical to how it's always been on record, and that data popped up. So that's where it's interesting to take a high P or a low P value, which this ends up being, which we'll see again why later, and analyze it and say, oh, that's why it happened. We can't always do that in this class because we can't always go back to the data and look, because I'm going to give you static data sheets. Even today, I'm going to hand you data sheets with a bunch of data sets on them. But we can't go back and reverse engineer why, because we can't look at the measurements. We can't go back and see what the differences were in the measurements. But that's what your research methods classes will do. We're getting nuts and bolts here as far as those small p-values. Make sense-ish? So that's why it might infuriate you when I say, I can't tell. There's certain things I can tell. Right now, that spike is unusual. It might not be unusual in 6 months. I have to track the next 6 months of data. That's where it gets interesting.
Is your internet secure?
Password protected?
Yeah.
The boxes are, yeah. And that's the first thing I thought. I'm like, shit, I remember we switched out our router, or not a router, but a modem. Did we put a password? I'm like, oh yeah, I did. And it's a goofy mathematical thing to figure out that I love. Even the people that know it can't get it right. I love that. Well, I love it. But yeah, that's the first thing I thought. I'm like, oh crap, somebody's parked outside the house, poaching my modem. Exactly, but I checked that first. Yeah, that's the first thing I checked, and then we started looking at the actual individual. Cool? Interesting. Ties directly to your lives. What doesn't necessarily tie directly to your lives? 2-sample t-test. Maybe not directly, but that's one of the skills in this curriculum. Maggie's like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It did tie, believe it or not, of course, and you'll see how directly to my life when I got my new cyclocross blade, and I almost died a few times with brakes. So I used a 2-sample t-test to actually figure out if I should change my brakes to V-brakes versus. We're going to analyze. I talked to 243 because it happened last term. We'll analyze it later, and we'll see if the brakes are actually doing
anything.
anything.
Went out and you pedal, brake. And then
Exactly. And the data, we're going to crunch the data in class a little later. But that's the idea, is that like, okay, I thought to do that. But the idea is still the same. If there's a difference, is the difference due to chance or is it due to some measurable effect? That's the question today answers with, of course, in spades, over and over again. Good? Good. Let's get back into it.
Are you ever going to tell us if you stacked that deck?
Am I ever going to tell you what, if I did what?
If you stacked that deck?
What deck? I don't know what deck you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about, Kate.
Okay.
That implies some kind of nefarious behavior. I don't like your tone. No, I'm kidding. You'll never know.